This is really for the founders that are out there or future founders that are interested in becoming a founder. This is really kind of speaking to that journey. And so I'll share a little bit just about my background before we kind of dive into it. I've been a 3-time founder myself. I currently have my own startup, Leader Pro, which has raised a seed round. I'm also a growth advisor at Mucker Capital, and I work with a lot of startups on go-to-market and growth, specifically from the 0 to 1 phase, although I have worked with more mature companies as well. In the past 10 years since I've been involved in startups, I've probably worked with 400 plus, maybe more than that at this point, B2B companies on go-to-market and growth, either as an advisor or as somebody who's helped with execution. In addition to that, I've also interviewed hundreds of founders through various different podcasts that I've hosted, as well as through an in-person event that we do called the Founders Roundtable that we started about 2 years ago as part of LA Tech Week. But we've now since partnered with JP Morgan and K&L Gates and Mucker for us to do a 12-city tour. We're going to actually be in Dallas and Atlanta in the next couple of weeks here in this month of October. And then we'll be in Miami next month. So if you're around or if you know of anybody in those cities, feel free to circulate. We usually bring in a panel of local founders and we kind of talk shop around their different war stories and what it's been like for them as a founder. Really the core of all of this is the idea of bringing community to the founder journey. I feel like the more that I've kind of spoken to founders, it can be a very lonely road. Statistically speaking, you have the same amount of success to be a founder that survives 3 years as you do, becoming a successful artist in the world of acting or a musician or what have you. But I don't think it's spoken enough around how difficult it really is and the challenges. And I'm hoping to really just kind of bring the idea of community to other founders so we can learn from one another, hear the stories, know we're not alone, and whatever you're dealing with, somebody else is probably dealing with it or has dealt with it already as well. And I would say the sole advantage that I've actually, been privy to is really just the exposure to working with so many founders and learning and hearing all their stories. And then just being able to digest that and regurgitate it to other people. And this is what I'm going to share with you in terms of some of the learnings that I've seen in talking and working with, so many founders in the past 10 years. So number one, I would say, you hear the idea of passion that comes up a lot of times in interviews with entrepreneurs and founders. And I take it a little bit step deeper than that. And I focus on curiosity as a greater trait than passion. And the reason why I say that is because I feel like passion can fizzle out. Passion can keep you in the office, for 20 hours out of 24 hours or what have you. But I think curiosity is the thing that keeps your mind occupied, whether you're in the office, whether you're eating, whether you're sleeping, whether you're dreaming. I know that I've gone through that where I will have dreams about, specific problems that I'm trying to solve for. And I think it doesn't really matter what you're doing physically. The idea of curiosity will always power your mind to be constantly solving problems. And you're going to just have a never-ending slew of problems as a founder whenever you decide to start that journey or if you are on that journey. Me personally, I'm uniquely curious about personal and professional growth in any shape and form, and more so the psychological and human condition around what facilitates growth, specifically the ability to be comfortable with the uncomfortable. I think the number one thing for every founder is to start with knowing what your why. And the why can be around the problem statement that you're looking to solve. But even more than that, to me, it's like a deeper personal why. And that personal why in a lot of the conversations that I've had with founders ends up stemming a lot of the times to some perhaps like childhood trauma, loss, or insecurity. Because building a startup is really like a marathon that's disguised as a sprint. If you think about a marathon, the top 3 that end up placing versus the rest of the pack, what's the real difference? And it's really about training, and it's about the level of discomfort that they went through in their training process to make them better than everybody else. I know founders that I've met that have talked about like, I want to go public, or, I want to have a liquidity event of this. And I think, when that's your onset goal, I have not seen founders be successful most of the times. unless they are a multiple time founder, meaning this is their second, third, or fourth startup. In which case, I think it is somewhat important to talk about a liquidity event and thinking about what that might look like as in terms of like how you're trying to structure your fundraising as well as how you try to structure your business and your go-to-market. However, if you're a first-time founder, I don't think you should be driven by a financial objective, because more often than not, you're going to be setting yourself up for a long, very frustrating road ahead, and it's going to make you feel, I think, somewhat handicapped and debilitated when you are deep in the weeds and in the trenches. And if your main goal is financial, it's really not going to push you to do that extra, give that extra effort that the next person is going to do if they truly already know what their why and their purpose is. Simon Sinek talks about this and relates it back to Apple. You guys can look it up online. I'll also share the links here as well. The why is your fuel, right? And regardless of what you think about Elon Musk from a personal or political perspective, as an entrepreneur, I think we haven't seen anybody like him, in generations. He says starting a company is like eating glass and staring into the abyss. It's a very common phrase that he says, and I just want people to really kind of like personalize what that statement really means, because really starting a company, whatever your most personal, professional level of discomfort is that you've endured so far in your life, starting a business is going to throw that out the window. It's going to be 10 times, 100 times as harder than anything you've ever done before. And the idea is that whenever you overcome that obstacle or whatever that hurdle is, you're going to have very little room to actually celebrate, because you're going to be jumping into the next thing, the next obstacle, and the next hurdle. And I think that's really what he means in terms of like staring to the abyss, because you really don't know when it's going to stop. And so that's something that I think a lot of people need to really try to understand. And that goes to being comfortable with the uncomfortable. I found in my personal life that the more I try to take on things that are personally uncomfortable, it helps me professionally. And what I mean by that is every day I try to do something that is uncomfortable. Whether that's going to the gym, going for a run, something that's physical, or or something that I've been putting off either professionally or personally. I just make a commitment to doing it that day. And I think that's something where it's a must. This idea of discomfort is like a muscle that can be built and grown. And you just have to be conscientious around constantly pushing your comfort zone, because if you don't, you're going to very easily, I think, be dissuaded or quit way too early when you're on your founder journey. I'm not going to go into every single one of these, but I think it's important for people to understand, especially if you're a current founder or you're looking to be a founder. These are my top 10 like founder commandments. This is more so geared towards the potential want to be founder, or if you're looking for what your idea is, because this is a little bit more early on. But I think you need to, number one, determine what your why is, as I kind of talked about. Determine who your ICP, your ideal customer profile, and make sure to get as narrow around that and defined around that as possible. I like to basically say, if you want to get as narrow to the point where you could see a picture or a profile of them on LinkedIn and know that this is going to be my ICP. So almost like having that visual attachment to what it is. Number 3 is going to be killing your ego. I see a lot of founders that end up building a product that they had some maybe like domain expertise over, or they endure the problem. And then very quickly, once you start building, you're going to start losing that edge of like really understanding the true problem statement. And so instead of building out the gate, you want to have as many conversations as possible, validate your idea before you actually build. And you can prioritize then what your build needs to look like by focusing on how difficult is the build, and then also ultimately what is a must-have or a need, and figuring out based on those two variables how you prioritize your product roadmap. The other part of it is like when you launch a product, it is never going to be perfect. And I see a lot of specifically like technical founders that will focus on this idea of perfection and not get it out into the market quick enough. You need to launch with an MVP that delivers that immediate value to your target customer. And then you need to be able to collect that feedback loop and iterate accordingly. Because the moment, even if you think it is perfect, the moment that you launch, everything's going to change. The only instance in where I would say, you take this with a grain of salt is if you're building out some kind of like deep technology, in which case, you're going to also require a different set of like business economics, and you're going to have to raise a ton of money in order for you to develop that. So it's a different process if you're building out deep tech. Number 6, learn how to sell. It's going to be an invaluable skill set. It's going to apply not just to acquiring customers, but it's going to help you when you do your fundraising. It's going to help you when you're actually like trying to hire people. It's going to help you facilitate in so many different ways. So I think that's another thing to think about. Number 7 is really try to go as far as you can without institutional funding. I know for the past decade plus, it's been very popular to go and raise capital or use that as a vanity metric. I don't think enough founders think about like the idea of dilution, as well as like the idea of like what a liquidity event will then need to look like the more capital that you raise, right? If you raise $10 million, you're going to have an exit of at least $10 million in order for you to actually see any dividend from that effort. So I think that's the very big thing that people need to think about. And if you do decide to raise, I do think you should discuss with your founding team what is a suitable financial outcome. I had a mentor that once asked me, is like, what are you looking to, what kind of outcome are you looking for? And I had given the stupid answer of I want to go IPO, and he asked me why. And I said, I thought it would be a good representation of the level of success of what we were able to do to change the world or change that specific industry. And he said, so if I gave you $50 million today, you would not take that. And all of a sudden I paused, and it changed the framework of how I decided to go and raise that round. The next one is also be careful who you give a board seat to. I've seen a lot of founders talk about this, especially towards a later stage, where it can be very crippling because the board member is not necessarily always in the weeds with you and does not always know what the best course of your business direction is. You still have to answer to them. And so you want to be able to pick somebody that's really understanding of your specific industry, or really is understanding of your leading style or your leadership style. And lastly, I'll just say is that everything is going to be a lot harder than you thought, and it's going to take a lot longer than you expected. These are like the top 10 founder mistakes that I've seen. Number 1, not going all in. Again, 2, raising more money than is necessary or raising for the sake of raising. Again, I bring up the idea of dilution. I know a friend of mine who's also a founder who has raised 3 different rounds, and he basically has to have a 50 million plus liquidity event for him to even feel like he's broken even on his time. He's been doing this for 7 years with the same company, which means that based on how much he's diluted, he might get 500,000 if he sells for 50 million, and that's a very real issue. You see that now, and you hear those stories now of companies that built unicorns, and with the markets where they are now, they've dissolved, and ultimately that amount of time that they spent in building up that unicorn is no longer any of real value for them. Third thing I kind of talked about before was just kind of waiting too long to deploy the product. Number 4 is selling into enterprise prematurely and then becoming a glorified dev shop with an unscalable product. I have a specific use case where I had a founder that I was working with, and their largest customer was Verizon, which accounted for 80% of their revenue, but they ended up building feature sets that was specific to that use case, and ultimately they had to pivot because it was not a scalable product beyond Verizon. Number 5 is not focusing on growth every single day. You need to be always constantly thinking about how you can acquire more customers. What do they need? How can you add additional feature sets to make it better? Number 6 is making excuses or not being self-aware, being afraid of rejection. Basically anything that's stopping you from doing what you know that you need to do. And a lot of times it's psychological. For whatever reason, there's something intrinsically tied to that. So that idea of, again, being comfortable with the uncomfortable will help you overcome a lot of these things. Number 7 is hiring against the problem, specifically sales. I'll see this again with a lot of technical founders where they'll bring in a VP of sales. I think the math is that most early stage companies end up churning through a VP of sales 3 times within a single year before they settle on their permanent hire. Now, if you can imagine like how many times and how costly that is, it can be a very debilitating thing, especially when you are very limited and lean with the amount of cash that you have. And then the next thing is not firing fast enough. Again, burning through additional capital to keep a team that is not producing or not getting you to the next level or the next thing. Number 8 is fear of failure. I think you have to be very comfortable with the idea of failure and what it actually means To me, failure is just a learning lesson. And I know that's talked about so commonly, but until you're actually doing it and you know whatever that thing is that you have to do could yield a negative outcome, and you're sitting there waiting to pull the trigger, the idea here is you need to get the ability to pull that trigger faster and faster and faster, because that'll help you incrementally get better and better every single day. Number 9 is not letting the data dictate direction. So I see this a lot with founding teams where they have multiple co-founders, and they ultimately start arguing or having a debate around either a design element or a feature set or whatever it might be, versus going out and getting the data to actually dictate what the answer should be. And then lastly is just giving up too early. I'm a strong believer in, like, whatever your suckiest moment is, it's not going to suck forever. And if you can keep lasting long enough to get through enough sucky moments, you're going to get to some semblance of success around the corner. I'm going to just kind of run through a few of these use cases of founders, that obviously some that you already know of, and then a lot that I've interviewed that you probably have never heard of. But just kind of sharing with you again, different stories of what people have to endure for them to kind of get to the other side of, again, some semblance of success. And I'm not even talking about Uber level success. I'm talking about getting to a Series A, or, getting to an IPO, or getting to a liquidity event, or just getting to the next step from ideation and having a customer. So this is a very famous one, but are you willing to do jail time? I bring this up a lot of times. It's like, what if you were to go back to your parents and say, hey, I'm thinking about starting this business, but I might have to go to jail for it. What are they going to say? Let alone what are your friends going to say? What is society going to say? And this is obviously, hindsight's 2020, but Travis Kalanick, when he started Uber, was going against a lot of state and local municipalities, especially around taxi regulations, which was run by local counties. And so you're breaking the laws and you're breaching these things in order for you to really disrupt industries. Not a lot of people would be willing to take that risk, especially when they start fighting with you in court. So how far are you willing to go for your belief that this is something that needs to be disrupted? The next thing is with Airbnb. This is pretty famous. They used to, they started off, selling air mattresses within people's apartments during conferences, starting off in San Francisco, because of the fact that hotels would hike up their rates during these conferences. It would make it very unattainable for the everyday person to go ahead to get to these conferences. That didn't work out as well. It wasn't until they got to YC and then they figured out that they needed to take photos when they went to New York and started doing that with their customers, that they were able to crack what that was for their growth. And in between that time period, they actually started selling cereal as a way for them to make some money and keep themselves alive. Again, another example of where a lot of companies, a lot of founders may have just given up. Like, we don't have any more money, we're starving. We tried this idea of doing the air mattresses. And this is just an example of keep going, finding a way to stay default alive, and persisting and persisting and persisting, with success being around the corner. This is Danny Hay, who I interviewed a couple of years ago. He started a company called Soapbox. They ended up raising a $3 million seed round. But before that, him and his wife had moved from New York to Los Angeles, and they took out a second mortgage on their home, ended up moving in with his family. These are things, again, it's not going to be popular decisions for your friends or your family a lot of times to make. It goes really counterintuitive to the grain of what we talk about as success in society. And so again, this is an example of how far are you willing to go for whatever your idea is to start getting it off the ground. Because in the very beginning, you're going to be the sole believer. You're going to have to get to some level of traction before people are going to be willing to give you funds or invest into your idea. Here's another founder that I interviewed, Christian Lang, who is the CEO and co-founder of TradeShift. They started off in Copenhagen. He told me a very interesting story of when they first started off. They were in a garage in Copenhagen where it gets to minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit. And when they're just kind of getting off the ground, they had to choose between turning on the heaters in the garage in that cold weather or charging their laptops because they had a blown fuse box. The company is now worth $2.7 billion, but again, it's those difficult times, those hard decisions. And again, if you haven't gone through those things yet as a founder, be prepared, because these are very real things that's going to happen in some way, shape, or form. Here's two other founders where we were at the Founders Roundtable. We did this in New York Tech Week last year, and both I think it was Tyler, who is the co-founder of Air, that mentioned that they went through a very scary time after they raised their seed round, where they had only three figures left, only a few $100s left in their business bank account. They were 2 weeks out, backwards on payroll, and then Noam also chimed in, and he mentioned the fact that he also was in a very similar situation. And again, these are times where a lot of founders, really have to dig deep, because they could have just given up. They could have just turned it in at that point in time, but they ended up, finding another way to just keep alive. And, I think if you stack up enough days of just making it through, those turn into weeks, it turns into months, it turns into years. And then ultimately you're going to be looking back at how far you actually came. These two people commonly played bat mitzvahs and weddings as a means to kind of get their startup off the ground in the first few years. This is Jeffrey Perlman. In the very beginning, he would play the clarinet, and he was playing weddings and bat mitzvahs for the first 2-3 years of his business before he was actually able to get enough traction and then go raise. And then also similarly, we have Timu, who is the CEO and co-founder of Ready Player Me. They've gone through a few different iterations of their product before they ended up raising from A16Z. But he was a DJ for the first few years of getting his startup off the ground. And then here we have Gaurav, who I've known for the past 4 years. He's pivoted his business 3 different times, most recently rebranding as Jiva AI. And in September, just last month, they closed a $16 million Series A. He's gone through a few different iterations, but he's somebody that I look at where he was able to fail fast to the point where he understood that they didn't have product market fit with specific products, and then be able to pivot. And based off of that ability, he's been able to gain enough faith from investors that he will ultimately figure it out. And I think that's also another thing that's important for founders to get to, is like trying to figure out like when do you have market fit, or when is your hypothesis like actually not a scalable product. And lastly, I interviewed influencer entrepreneur David Meltzer, who ended up losing $100 million, and it's a famous story for him, but he lost $100 million in assets during a real estate crash and had to rebuild his wealth. One of the biggest things was he wanted to, make money by for the purpose of buying his mom a home, or her dream home. And the most demoralizing part of this story is that he had to give up his mom's home because of this experience. Fortunately, he was able to recover and start things over again. But again, this is another thing where you're gonna fall back sometimes. You're gonna go 3 steps forward and sometimes 5 steps back. It's gonna be about what do you do next. And I'm going to stop there. I'm going to open it up for questions, but this is my contact information in case you guys wanted to reach out to me for investment, for advisory, whether in any of those capacities. All right, so we have a question here. I'm going to open it up. Feel free to enter it into the Q&A button here if you have any questions, or add it into the, you can add it to the chat. Hi, Abhishek.
Hey, Chris.
Hey, how's it going?
Pretty good, thank you. Thanks for this awesome, this kind of helps, entrepreneurs to keep going on.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yep.
I mean, if you know that you are completely on the correct path and others are thinking that you should pivot, you already know that this is working. Internally, how do you measure, traction? Because internally, I know that we have made a huge traction, like having a partnership with somebody as big as BlackRock, Franklin, but revenue has not started yet, right? So how do you measure traction in intangibles? That's my question.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, let the data dictate whatever those metrics are. Uh, I think there's a few things to think about here when you're talking about a potential customer or partnership. Um, an LOI is not revenue, right? And it's not considered a customer. And I think that's something that you need to think about is like when you're asking somebody to put their money where their mouth is, that's where that to me is the definition of traction. It's not the promise of, it's the delivery of. And that's sometimes a hard thing to get to, but I think you need to be very deliberate with that.
Follow up.
Yep.
What if they are a network partner? Because we are not asking for a LOI from somebody, but you're building a business with somebody big and you are using their network. So how to measure that as attraction?
So, to me, that would be like, what's their deliverable, and have they done that deliverable yet?
Thanks, Chris.
Yep. Cool. Next question. Hi, Kirsty.
Hey Chris, thank you so much for that. That was really helpful and beneficial. My question is, so we're building a project, which is actually a real estate project, but part of that is a tech element of the community base. So it's called the Conscious Island. So it's all around wellness, holistic, and the idea being that we're having an online community that will physically become part of the event community. I have just kind of thought we've been building it as one project, but as you were speaking, I'm kind of thinking that it would almost be beneficial to build it as separate projects, as the real estate arm of the business, but also the tech element. And I just wondered your thoughts on that, and whether that would be something that you think would be beneficial to do it separately, but kind of under the same brand.
What are you actually selling, or what is going to be, what is the product or service?
So in regards to the tech side, it would be an online wellness center that would then be able to be hosted on the physical island as a platform as well. So you wouldn't necessarily need to be there live. You could be there online, but to start, it would be an online community.
I see. So to me, it's like, if I'm relating it to anything, it would be like having a brick and mortar retail store versus online distribution.
Yes.
Right. So if that's the case, I would try to look at that model and seeing, how, to me, that's like different distribution channels for revenue, right? So like it's like different revenue channels. So I would look at it as such, and your go-to-market will be different for both, right? So the physical in person versus the digital component, and however you're able to achieve it, I would look at it separately, because again, like if you take that retail example, how they're driving physical foot traffic versus how they're selling online is going to be two very different strategies.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much.
Of course. Cool. I'm going to go over here. We have quite a few questions. So Stephanie Usri, how important is it for founders, CEOs to get feedback from their early hires and their board on how they're performing in their role? Okay. So this is more so, I think it's related to, let me just share my screen so we can all see the question here. So the question is from Stephanie here. How important is it for founder CEOs to get feedback from their early hires and their board on how they're performing in their role? That's a tricky question. I mean, I think, really the only way to measure your performance is based on whether or not you're able to hit certain metrics. And if you're not able to consistently hit metrics, or you're premature to those metrics, I would say it's about communication, your level of communication and transparency. I don't think it's as important to get it from hires versus it is to get it from your board. But that's how I would look at it. And we have anybody else with their hands raised? There we go. Hi, Dae-Young.
Hello.
Hi.
So I put my question in the Q&A box.
Okay, here it goes.
Yeah, I'm a college freshman, and I just wanted to ask you for one advice that you would really give to a college student, and regarding how a college student might leverage their position as a college student in terms of startup.
Yeah, for sure. Do you have an idea in mind, or are you just interested in working in startups?
Yeah, I'm just interested in the idea. I don't yet have a.
Okay, so I think it's there's two parts. One is, if you are just interested in like working within a startup, I think you should do an internship, and figure out what kind of role that you're actually interested in within an organization like that. It's going to be super fast, and you're going to be exposed to a lot of different things. But I will also say that it's also going to be very unstructured, and you need to be going into there as to like trying to figure out what value you can bring to the table, and try to become an expert in something, and then solving for problems that the rest of the team is either too busy to solve or they don't have the expertise to solve. Separately, if you have an idea or you're trying to develop an idea or validate an idea, I think being a college student, you can definitely leverage that fact to get access to senior leadership that might be trickier for somebody else to get in front of. You'll be surprised how many people are actually willing to help you if you are willing to go and ask for it. I remember like with my first startup, it was a consumer, a CPG good, and we were doing online tuxedo rentals. And I was able to get a meeting with the CEO of Men's Warehouse at the time through a LinkedIn DM, by naively saying your stock price is shit, and I think that you need to start thinking about a digital component, and we've been doing this for a year. Would you like to talk? And so I think, again, leverage the fact that you don't lean into what you don't know, and be willing to ask for help.
Thank you so much.
Yep, of course. Hopefully this is helpful for people. Again, I don't know, but any other of these people want to, whoever asked the question, if in the Q&A, if you want to raise your hand, we can go ahead and answer it live. Great. I'll start with you, Florence, and then we'll go to Priscilla.
Hi, Chris. Thanks so much for the talk.
Yeah, of course.
Our question is in regards to our first customers. So we have early customers, but they're all slightly different, and we can't really see commonalities yet between them. And so we're just in the process of trying to hone in on our ICP, and we wanted to get your tips on how you recommend to do that. Yeah.
So number one, I always, before I work with any startup, is have them fill out a persona matrix or ICP matrix. I'll be happy to send you guys a few links, including that persona matrix, but fill that out. The persona matrix is there. I look at two things when you're trying to understand customer, right? It's ICP, which is going to be based on the company or account. And then there's the persona, which is the individuals within the organization that you're going to be selling into, or you need to get buy-in from. And so the matrix is structured in a way where it's broken down by the companies as well as the personas within those companies as to who you actually need to get in front of. And then I ask about channels that you use, and then the messaging that you use for those different types of individuals. And so if you do have, let's just say it's 5, break down what the 5 of those are. And then I would make sure to try to get, at least 10 conversations with others that look alike to each of those customer profiles, and then see which one actually has the largest percentage that yields into a positive response. And I wouldn't worry about like converting to a customer yet, but like focusing on like the idea, are they leaning into your solution or the pain point that you're solving for?
Right. Okay.
Yep.
So you're saying narrowing it down on 5 ICPs and then like conduct 10 conversations roughly with each one of them.
With a minimum of 10 across each, and then you're letting the percentage basically dictate which ones you should focus on, right? And then two other variables I would think about too in that equation is like sales cycle and LTV. Because if you're going to sell to enterprise, a lot of times it's going to be a super long sales cycle, but a lot larger LTV. And if you're selling into, mid-market or SMB, it's going to be, shorter sales cycle, but lower LTV. And it depends on what your operational objective is. If you're trying to break even as quickly as possible, then you're going to want to go for like the smaller deal sizes that close a lot faster to get the cash in. But if you're going to raise a round, you might be focusing on the larger LTV or the larger logos. That's going to take a longer sales cycle. But that's something to also consider in terms of like how you start deducing that. And that will also help you prioritize like what your runway looks like over time.
Okay, got it. Thank
Yep.
you so much.
Of course. Cool. We have Priscilla next, and then we'll go to Ryan and Kemi. Hi, Priscilla.
Hey, Chris, can you hear me?
Yep, I can.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, thanks so much for the talk. It was super helpful to hear the mistakes and advice that you shared. So I currently work at a startup in product and very interested in being a founder, especially about driving strategy, leading a team. And I know one of the things you talk about a lot is finding your why. And I'm curious, what do you think are, from all the founders that you've talked to, what are some great whys that you've seen that have fueled them to keep working on their startup even through difficult times?
Yeah.
And what do you think are some, aside from financial motivation, that don't really work out?
Yeah, I mean, the personal whys are the ones that I think like stand out to me. Funnily enough, like I've spoken to a lot of founders that have lost a parent like when they're younger. And I think that puts a chip on their shoulder. I can attest to that. That's something that I've went through. And I feel like, being super candid, like I'm chasing the approval of a ghost. And that's like a deep rooted personal psychological why. Others I've seen like that have found their whys are in, other like their insecurities, in other past traumas. So it's turning a lot of the times a negative into a net positive. Again, those are the things that's really propelling somebody. I think, again, if you think about like the physical metaphor of it, of like running a marathon or like in that kind of like physical competition, those are the people that are like crazy, like committed to that and being the best at it, right? And I think it's very similar in terms of like the startup journey. Other than that, would be if you have a great founding team with a tremendous amount of like domain expertise around a specific technical function. Those are the other instances where it's like it's not as personal, but I would say like those are few and far between, meaning like those are the ones that already have, either been very successful in like a senior leadership role in larger organizations, and they have the relationships to facilitate them kind of like trying to go out there and build something from the ground up, or they have like a super like deep technical understanding around something that not many people do. Those are the only other instances where I've seen like that can be more powerful than the personal whys. But 80 or 90% of the founders I've spoken to, it's that personal why that's getting them to the other side.
Okay, super interesting. Thank you.
Of course. Hey, Ryan.
Hi, Chris. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, I can hear you fine.
First, I want to say, thank you for addressing the issue of the loneliness at the top. I do think that it's something that doesn't really get brought up often enough. So I really appreciate that call out. My question really quickly is, how do you look about building your board? Because I know that initially you said, don't take on people, especially at the later stages, that may not be necessary. But could you maybe give some examples of who do you absolutely need on your board and can really kind of add value, especially at the pre-seed round?
Yeah, I would talk to their portfolio companies. And a lot of times they're going to have it on their LinkedIn of like which companies they're on the board of, and I would reach out to them to ask them. Obviously, the more conversations you can have, the better, to see what real value is actually being realized. A lot of investors will say a lot of like value add that they're going to do, but I would say very few of them actually deliver. So I think that's number one. And the other thing too is just like a board member, similar to like a founder, is like getting into a marriage. So I think like the more that you can kind of do your own research around, even like digging into like their social media presence and the stuff that they talk about, or their personal belief systems and values, make sure it aligns with yours, because that ultimately might become an issue down the road.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris.
Yep. Hey, Kemi.
Hey, Chris, thanks for this presentation. Funny enough, my question that I put in the chat was kind of like the previous question,
Okay.
but that one was from the VC being a board member. But in lieu of not raising institutional capital, which to the prior person's question, they get advisors or a board member for that guidance, how would you choose just pure advisors and issuing those advisory shares to get that guidance? How do you go through vetting those types of relationships versus a board member via a VC?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of times you should. I just had a talk about this with the Portco of Muckers, and I think like any advisor that you bring on, they should be a customer. Like they should be willing to evangelize for you within their company or their organization as a customer. And that's kind of like how I would vet. Like you have to get some real tangible like value add. That's my opinion. It's just like be as direct and forthcoming as possible to kind of get them to commit to whatever you're building. The last thing you need is kind of like just somebody like spinning wheels with you.
Awesome, great, thanks.
Yep. Hi, Derva.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you great.
Hi, so my question is, what is your take on accelerator and pre-accelerator programs, and when is the right time to apply to them?
For accelerators?
Yes.
Yeah, for accelerators, I mean, I think those are great. Like, if you have an idea, I mean, every accelerator is gonna be different in terms of like how much traction you actually need to show, right? But I think it's always a worthwhile endeavor to be a part of that, because you're going to be putting yourself into an environment or a situation that's like highly competitive, and that will a lot of times like push you to do the things that are uncomfortable and keep you more accountable to doing the things that are uncomfortable, right? So I'm a big believer in that, especially like, if that's like somebody that's going from corporate and directly into like trying to become a founder. I think those are great avenues. I know like some of them, can be pretty expensive capital in the very beginning. They're asking for anywhere from like 7 to 10% for a few $100,000. Again, like, but if you're kind of in your own way, I would say like that's a good route to go. If it's a different scenario where you're a little bit further along, you're able to kind of, you see a pathway to revenue and you are a pathway to a few customers, I would maybe then steer away from that, but only just because of the fact that you don't need to dilute right now. But that's again, the different kinds of, I think, like scenarios that I would think about when doing that.
Okay. Yep. Cool. Thank you so much.
Yep. Hi, Rajko.
Hello, Chris.
How's it going?
It's going. Thank you. I didn't expect to ask that question. There was just something that stood out to me when you responded to the personal why question.
Yeah.
Something that I wrote down around chasing approval from a ghost. And I'm just wondering, as one goes on that journey, let's say you have that motivation, how does that resolve itself throughout time? Or does it resolve itself? Meaning, you say yourself chasing approval from a ghost.
Yeah.
To what extent is that on the one side the fuel that in the end might disappoint, given that it's a ghost that we're chasing here?
Yeah. I mean, I think you got to take it with a grain of salt, right? I think it comes back down to self-awareness. When I say that, I mean, I would say that's like 50% of the motivator, right? It's like you can't be letting these personal, motivators like completely take over. And you can't let that be then blinding you to reality of what your business is, right? So I think like take it with a grain of salt in the sense that I think it's like when you already know that the journey will be uncomfortable and you're kind of like going through these things, that person digging into that like personal why can be very useful. But on the day to day, like that's not what's driving me. Like the day to day is focusing on like, these are the problems that we have to solve for. How do we deploy something to get enough feedback around it to validate whether we should continue down that path or not continue down that path. Yeah, hopefully that helps like clarify a little bit more.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, there's the business why and then there's the personal why, and you need to find the right combination for you.
Yeah. I hear you. Okay, thanks for clarifying.
Fair enough. Hi, Leah.
Hi, Chris. Leah Williams. I'm head of Digital Undivided. We're a very large network, about 20,000 women founders.
Oh, very cool.
I'm going to ask you a question that I get a lot and see what you think about it.
Sure.
So I heard you caution about the capital rate, the amount that you make from institutional investors, especially as it relates to dilution. We're always sort of giving that caution. I was really appreciative of you bringing that up. But what I get asked a lot also from founders, particularly if they're first-time founders, is this preference around the types of capital. Like whether or not to have any debt capital versus trying to just, kind of bootstrap it until you get to the place of venture investment, or whether you should only go towards, grant programs and things like that. So I wonder if you have any thoughts on that in terms of types of capital.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the business model. To be honest, there's, again, like if you're building like deep technology, like you don't really have a way around raising institutional capital. You kind of have to, that's part of the journey, but yeah, it just depends on the business, right? And the business model. And some you can do with grants in the very beginning. And then some you can do with just raising a friends and family, and doing equity that way. It's a little bit more favorable to you. And then, on the debt side of things, I see a lot of like e-commerce companies will raise debt, just because of the nature of that, again, like that business and like how the cash flow is. But I think that's, again, something that is, there's no one size fits all necessarily. It's really depending upon the business model. But that being said, I think like, yes, you should take a more deeper look at what your business model is and what is actually available to you.
Right, understood. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Hi, Istvan. Hello, Istvan. Hello. Okay.
Oops, sorry.
Oh, good.
Sorry. Okay. No, I actually have two questions.
Sure.
As people are asking questions, I keep getting more ideas. But
okay.
One of the questions is, we are a deep tech startup, and we need a lot of money to make to get to the next step. We have prototypes, right? And we're trying to raise. We know that we need $15 million to get to that point where it's like a next step. But VCs are saying, well, we're comfortable putting in 5, and we only want to do 5, and let's see where you can get. But we know that with 5, we can't get to the next step. We can only be like halfway to where we need to be. There's no milestone, and then I'm assuming it'll be difficult to get back to VCs and ask for more money. So I feel like it's their formula that they're going by, but we're a capital-intensive hardware business. So, any ideas?
I mean, I wouldn't say so. A founder shouldn't say can't. There's definitely a way. I don't know if that means having more conversations with more funds or trying to set a metric. So to me, what I would go is say, for example, you have somebody that's willing to commit 5 million, but not the 15. I would go back and try to figure out what is a compromise around a specific metric that you can get to that would then allow for, them to provide additional capital, if that makes sense. And trying to get creative around that, what that could potentially look like, whether it's like, that's going to get you to, I don't know, some kind of like MVP of a product or a demo of a product or solution that can then allow you to at least solicit potential customers, or even asking them to put you in front of potential customers to then give them the confidence that that dollar figure that you're suggesting is validated.
Yeah, we have demos. We have the technology demonstrators in the hands of customers. So the next milestone would be to give them a better one that they can actually use, and then get orders. So, but to get to that next level is where we need to be. So I don't know if you're open to a second question. I'm happy to yield.
Sure.
So the second question was, my co-founder is actually one of those very deep technical people that you described earlier when we were talking about motivation. You said a great founding team with tremendous amount of technical knowledge. So he is one of those people. And the problem is that he speaks not in sentences, but in seminars.
Yeah.
And you ask a question, and so, I take him into an investor meeting, and his personal introduction is a half an hour. And so I'm trying to get him to, and every time he says, yeah, okay, no, I understand. But so now I'm like stuck with this challenge of, I think I'm going to have to develop a course for him to, get him to not do that. But any quick fixes or any tips might be good.
I don't think there's a quick, you're talking about a personality fix. That's not going to be fast or anything, right? I think and there's there's people who are maybe don't have the same kind of social cues as others, right? And so I think which is fine. I think it's just trying to figure out a way to communicate with them in a way that's going to be productive and get to the desired outcome from both sides, right? So I think it's I don't know, that's a tough one. I think I would probably not bring them to the meetings, or work on, again, some kind of pitch together where it's you're going to just have to be that much more heavily involved, almost like a lawyer with cross-examination of a witness kind of thing, and make sure that they kind of get their summary of points across, right? And I think and I think that the ways they should kind of get that through would just be again, if you can use somewhat binary outcomes to dictate the reasoning, so it's not just subjective, but it's more objective, and however you present that to that person, that could be helpful.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yep. Hi, Ludovica.
Yes. Hi.
Hi. How's it going?
Chris, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
How are you?
Good.
So I had a question. I'm the CEO of Magnetic Tides. We are a spin-out from university. And I want to know your experience with intellectual property that belongs to university. How is this a positive or negative fact for VC? And when is the right time to bargain with the university?
Yeah, you need to get a lawyer. I mean, I'm not gonna be able to provide that guidance necessarily. Yeah, just get a good lawyer that can help you with the IP and figure out when the timing is. If it is possible to delineate between the university and your company.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, that's definitely something that's going to be a deeper question.
Okay.
DH.
Hi, Chris. It's Danny.
Hi, Danny.
I guess I come up as DH on here. Thanks for letting me know. So I asked in the chat, but I'll just read this here. And by the way, thanks for sharing your why, especially as it pertains to family and personal, as mine is similar. So appreciate that.
For sure.
And helping us kind of think through that. I agree. It's super important to keep you going. So I'm a non-technical founder. I'm leaving a career in enterprise software sales.
Yep.
I'm building a sales AI product that I've envisioned, using myself in past roles. So I'm the user.
Yep.
And kind of building something that I've seen a need for myself. And so my question is really more philosophical around finding a technical co-founder.
Yep.
And I'm just gathering a lot of feedback in terms of best practices and mistakes that people have seen where subject matter experts like myself in a sales domain, I'm technical enough, what are some, do's and don'ts of finding a good technical co-founder that you want to bring along to help you build an MVP and really for the long haul?
Yeah, I would say like the ones that have referrals the best, right? Like that's ideal. But second to that would be, there's a lot of different ways. I mean, referrals, somebody through your own network, going to like your first degree of connections through LinkedIn or second degree of connections on LinkedIn, and then kind of running filters against that to see who's technical within your network might be helpful. But if you're trying to branch out to that, the next thing I would focus on, if you're just completely cold reaching out to people and just trying to have as many conversations as possible, would be Y Combinator provides like a matchmaking service for that purpose of like matching technical and non-technical founders. So I would go through that. Just know that that's probably going to be a long journey, but it's not impossible. In my personal experience as somebody who is a non-technical founder, I found my CTO and that I've done 2 startups with now through a matching service called Co-Founders Lab. And how I did that was this is maybe 5 or 6 years ago, but like I basically proved out that there is a market for what my idea was before kind of trying to look for a technical co-founder, because you're asking basically for them to trust in you and what you're doing, that there's a market for it, to give up enough time, because you're asking for sweat equity essentially, right? So you're basically asking for somebody to commit time, a huge amount of time, and the opportunity cost of foregoing a salary where they could probably be making 6 figures doing something else.
Sure. Yeah, that's great. Great feedback. Appreciate it. I've been making the rounds, meeting as many folks as possible in my network locally and abroad to get similar feedback.
Yeah, and they are out there, and I think it's just making sure you're trying to find somebody that will be in the trenches with you. I got really lucky. I found somebody that I trust wholeheartedly and understands a part of that technical part that I'm not so keen on. But I also would say like you need to also learn enough so you can be dangerous enough to know what their strengths and their weaknesses are, and that you can self-teach yourself that part.
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing a lot of work to build this out myself, right?
Yep.
As much as possible, wireframing, coding, all that stuff to basically show them, hey, here's like minimally what we're trying to build, and make it easy for them to envision, what we're thinking about.
Yeah.
By the way, fun fact, I worked with Danny He, who was mentioned in your presentation at IBM back in the day, which was a surprising face to see.
Yeah, man.
So, small world.
Yeah, very cool.
Thanks.
Yep. Almost there. All right, Greg, how's it going?
Hey, pretty good. Chris, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you great.
Cool, man. Yeah, thanks for taking the time to share a lot of really great insights. Definitely sparking lots of ideas. I've worked with a lot of startups. Most of them have gone into the ground.
Sure.
Starting with a partner of mine who has a very deep technical expertise in helping people with filling out liquor license applications. So it's a huge, regulatory environment.
Yep.
So we have this idea to build out a SaaS product that can, basically figure out what forms are needed and fill out all the forms. And we've got an MVP, and I'm trying to figure out, on this idea of taking on, capital in terms of growing out our development versus maybe using the ICPs. We've got a lot of lawyers that help clients to do these applications, and maybe putting them on the platform at a discounted rate to use them as beta clients and bootstrap it that way, and just kind of trying to see what your thoughts might be on, non-technical starter later in here to build this out.
Yeah, I would do the latter. I would try to get as much traction as possible, and try to bootstrap for as long as possible, because that's always going to be the thing that investors are thinking about when you go into a room with them. It doesn't matter. It's fundraising is like a full-time job, so you're going to have to spend, you're going to have to allocate a ton of time to it, and so when you're doing that, you probably just want to make sure you put your best foot forward. And even let's just say, for example, you do get buy-in and people do have confidence in your product, you want to get the best possible valuation, right? And you get a better valuation when you actually have traction, when you have customers, when you have revenue, or you can prove out repeatability around a go-to-market exercise or strategy.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to allow you to do a multiple of whatever they're going to initially give you without that, to be honest.
Gotcha. Yeah, we've got some deal flow, and we're still toying with our model, whether we go to directly to customers with, small businesses and have them, come to a site versus white label the platform for, like I said, for law firms. So even the business model, we're still trying to figure out, how best to monetize this while we're doing this.
So do both, right? So try to figure out I would do both and figure out what are the logistics of this channel or this path versus the other, right?
Mm-hmm.
From the amount of effort, it's time and money. So how much time does it take to go down this one path, and how much money does it cost us, and how much money does it realize us, and then similarly in the other path, and that will help you figure out again which one you should focus on.
Last quick question. Thanks,
Sure.
Chris. Any ideas about how to find more of an advisor, mentor in this space, like legal tech or SaaS, as opposed to, co-founder and investor, someone that's a little bit more higher level?
Yeah, again, I would maybe look up, you're talking about selling into or partnering with law firms. I would try to find somebody that has access to a lot of potential customers for you, and just generate a list of, I'm sure there's a never ending list. There's probably at least 100 or so, and just reach out to them and say, hey, we're building this and we're trying to solve for this problem, and
Cool.
have those conversations,
Yeah, right on, Chris. Really appreciate it. Thanks
Cool.
for your time.
Yep. All right, last few questions and then we're gonna hop off here. So David. Hey, David. Hello?
Hello, can you hear?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Hi, yeah, I'm working in the AI networking space, and I find out this space is still using the old cloud infrastructure for AI. So as a result, there's a bunch of mismatch and system reliability issues. Okay, so there is a new network topology for this AI networking, but I find out the adoption is very slow.
Yeah.
And kind of reluctant. That is the kind of technology and market I'm dealing with. I already have an MVP product already, trying to get early adopters. So what is your advice for me to work on to deal with this industry?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the time, the one variable I didn't talk too much about is timing, right? And timing is a big player in. I mean, electric vehicles.
I thought this is the perfect time.
Yeah, I get what you think, but what does the market think, right? And that's the question here, and that's the issue. Is like you can't. It is tough, and it's expensive ultimately to create a new category, but also to like educate a market, right, around what may not be a painkiller. And I just think about like electric vehicles, like electric vehicles have been around for decades, and it's way before Tesla came around. And but what needed to happen was you needed this dramatic shift or this drastic shift in infrastructure to allow for it to have the scalability, right? So you need to have the charging stations across the country, across the world, and you needed somebody to invest into that part of it in order for then the other thing to work. And so I just use that as an example, which may or may not be a great metaphor, but I think that's something you need to think about here too, is just like, if you're taking it out to market, you're having the conversations, but you cannot find market fit, then you probably need to find something else. Like, unfortunately, like you don't, or pivot the product to something that's a little bit, that's closer to what people are familiar with, versus doing like the full switch.
Can I follow up this issue with you?
Sure.
Offline?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great presentation, Chris. Thank
No,
you.
appreciate it. Thank you. All right, last one here. I don't know how to pronounce it, so I'm not going to, but.
That's all good. So hi, my name is Nzisa.
Nzisa.
And my question is around your why. I think some of the examples you gave really resonated with me. And
Sure.
my question is, so I am Kenyan and a woman, obviously. And I've also have a very deep technical background. My background is computer science, software engineering, and I've worked over 20 years in the tech industry. Some of what I'm doing for my, like what I'm going to be doing for the solution, I have done before. I've built before for 5 years. And I also have medics as part of my co-founding team who are immigrants. So given all of that, which area should we lean on for our personal why, or at least me as the main founder? And then the second question is, I've seen some pitch decks start with the why as like the second slide in, and that seems to be a very strong start. But I just wanted to get your perspective if I should do something like that, or I should just go back to just the more standard flow. I should also mention that currently for the last 6 years, I've been working in a Silicon Valley, one of the big companies, and I lead deep tech transformations there.
Okay, got it. I mean, I think there's a professional why, right? And then there's a personal why. And I think what you're talking or alluding to is like, what's the forward facing one that you're going to put into like a pitch deck, right? So like, in terms of like whatever the mission is, why are you guys on this mission? And
right.
Yeah, I mean, I think like you kind of just listed it out already. I mean, you just told me you're Kenyan, you're female, you're somebody that has like a deep amount of like technical expertise. You are already like just from that, like a very underserved market that you can leverage for gaining visibility. I think you kind of just answered your own question, to be honest. I think that the way that you led in was just kind of like the way that, yeah.
I was just wondering if I should lean into the technical aspects or into my personal story, but it sounds like the personal story is more compelling, which kind of makes sense because we're trying to build remote monitoring as well as embedding clinical trials into our solution, because the underserved markets actually are the most impacted by chronic disease and all this. So our story probably should tie into that. So thanks. Thanks for talking me out.
No, it's all good. That works perfect. I would focus on that. That's more relatable. It's people buy stories. That's what it is. They invest into the stories, or people buy stories. That's what it is. You got to figure out the human condition of it.
Okay, quick last question. Should I do that as the first slide? I've seen a lot of decks doing that now. I don't know if that's a thing.
You could do it as, I mean, you don't have to have it as the first slide. I mean, you can. I mean, I would just say either that and it's in the first slide, or you can just preface it in the outreach that you do as part of it.
Okay, much appreciated.
Yep.
This was very helpful. Thanks.
For sure. Okay, I'm going to do one last one and then we're going to take off here. I appreciate everybody sticking around for so long. Luby?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Adebayo Atibade.
Okay.
I'm the founder of Lobby AI.
Got it.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah. Thanks so much. This was super insightful. So my question is, I've had a hard time with co-founders. Probably had like 3. And one of the problems I've had over time is just like commitment. A lot of times my co-founders don't want to quit their full-time job. It's not, they're not pulling their weight in what they're supposed to do. Luckily, I'm the technical founder. So besides just being technical, I've also founded other companies and grew them to substantial ARR. And so I've gone to a stage in my startup now where like that need for a co-founder is not as crazy as it was before, even though I know that investors like you to have co-founders. But I thought I built it to a sustainable level where I have a good customer flow. I have like a good amount of initial traction, and I'm wondering, should I still even worry about still kind of like looking out for co-founders, even though I think I have a good rhythm. By the way, I have some board advisors that are doing great as well. So it's curious to know what your thoughts are on that, because at some point, I'm going to want to fundraise. This has been bootstrapped so far. And I know that investors really like the whole co-founder story. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
I mean, I feel like now it's not as critical, like, to be honest. I don't think, I mean, I've spoken to a few that have invested into like solo founders. I don't think it's as critical. I think if you bring in a co-founder that is not full-time, that's a bigger red flag than a solo founder.
Right.
So I wouldn't worry about it. I would focus on the traction, and you can always, you can hire certain roles if you do already know where you need to fill the gaps. I don't think it's as important nowadays.
Okay.
Yep. Keep building.
And are you saying I should, even when I've gone to a point where I'm ready to like raise a round?
Yeah. Because it would just be for vanity purposes, right? It's like you're just doing it for commercial, like cosmetic purposes, not like it's not actually filling anything. So I wouldn't do that.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. Super helpful.
Awesome. On that note, I want to thank everybody so much for taking the time here, and 40 or so people sticking around, and we had a few hundred on here. So super awesome. Thank you guys. Hopefully this was useful, and I will make sure to get the materials out to you guys after this call.